So today I want to talk about the importance of dynamic range, seeing that the Nikon ZR, which was just released, has been gaining a lot of popularity due to its ability to shoot red RAW, red 3D, whatever the hell they're calling it, whatever it is, I have no idea. It is also super cheap. Just like Chinese food at the local Chinese takeout, anything that is super cheap in this ridiculous economy is welcome in my book. But one of the biggest concerns that I've been hearing is that how it tests poorly in dynamic range performance. And before I start talking a bunch of shit about Nikon ZR and all that stuff, I gotta be really careful with my words, because there was another camera, the Lumix S1II, which I talked a lot of shit about when it was released, and we all know how that turned out. Literally 2 weeks after my tube doucher shill bitch ass tested the Lumix S1II, I ended up switching entirely. I sold a bunch of my Sony camera bodies, I sold a bunch of my Sony lenses, and I ended up buying an additional Lumix S1II and an additional Lumix S1II, as well as a Lumix S9, because it was just that good. There's nothing I could do, there's nothing I could say other than that. Believe it or not, one of my biggest concerns prior to switching over to Lumix S1II was the dynamic range. The other was obviously autofocus performance compared to my Sony FX3 and Sony ZV-1, which I have come to find out works perfectly fine, and in many cases better than my Sony ZV-1 and FX3. The reason why I have to mention the Sony ZV-1 is because the FX3 is an older system, whereas the Sony ZV-1 is the newer one with AI and all that other bullshit. I can confirm and attest to you that the Lumix S1II's autofocus is indeed better in my use case, the way I use my camera, than the Sony FX3 and Sony ZV-1. I'll be speaking about that more in other videos going forward. If you're interested in that kind of bullshit, nitty-gritty, YouTuber, douchey, trash analysis, hit the subscribe button. You know the rest. Buy the links in my description so that I don't have to work a real job anymore. Also, excuse me for falling into the tube doucher content creator trash, whatever you want to call this thing of holding a mic. It just sounds better to me than putting it here in my chest, over here in my hand. So I'm just holding it like this because I just like the way it sounds. All right, I like this ASMR. You could hear that bird. That thing is going to end up being cooked at the local Chinese food restaurant that I was talking to you about earlier that was cheap. But yes, I just like the way it sounds. First of all, why do I have this Lumix S1II rigged out with this small rig Tribex SE tripod? You know, got the red custom painted Tilta cage, all this bullshit. I'm just trying to show it. That's all I'm trying to do. And links in the description below for all of these things, if that's, should definitely buy it. Before I offend, any of my other fellow tube douchers out there, take what I'm telling you with somewhat of a grain of salt, because I have not tested a Nikon ZR, okay? But I have been filming with the Lumix S1II and the Sony FX3. And there are some arguments, with regards to using the Nikon ZR and its low-end dynamic range performance, is that if you're filming stuff, you should be lighting properly, and you should be in better, good situations anywhere where you don't really need all of those additional stops of dynamic range. And with that, I tell you, you gotta calm the F down, fam, because not everybody is filming in a studio environment. Not everyone is filming with a crew on set, with lighting, with freaking a scrim, with a focus puller, with a gaffer, with a grip, with under the table cash happy endings during break time. Some people film run and gun. Some people film weddings, like my trash unprofessional videographer loser ass. No one has time to always be filming in the best circumstances. A lot of times we have to film in the environment that we are given, such as wedding ceremonies and other bullshit where lighting is just straight up diabolical, more atrocious than most YouTuber sponsor ad reads, including my own. So with that being said, when you look at this footage of my Lumix S1II, let's say I just drop my standard LUT over the top. When you see that, you're like, whoa, the subject's face is completely blown out like my ass after eating 4-week-old Vietnamese food that my mom used to keep in the refrigerator, because Asian women of that generation have a tendency to be super cheap and will not throw away food no matter how old it is, because as long as it is in the refrigerator or the freezer, it is always fresh. It doesn't matter if it is furry and alive. It's protein. So that is neither here nor there, but to continue, yes, it is blown out when I haven't adjusted it yet, but I could pull back the highlights, I can raise the shadows, bring the contrast back, bring some saturation back, and then now I have a nice, mostly even image without going through all like the vector scopes and doing all this like additional grading. This is just using basic sliders on Lumetri, on Premiere Pro, not even DaVinci Resolve like all of these other D-bags are switching to. I am still a piece of trash using Premiere, paying way too much money for it for whatever reason, even though I am running very low on professional booking clients, because again, I absolutely have no skill. As you can see, I'm just filming here in my backyard with a 50mm f1.8 lens because I think bokeh looks cinematic. Back to the subject at hand, I've been in multiple situations when I was filming with my FX3 where I had to bring back highlights, raise shadows, whatever, because I just couldn't control the environment at that time, and I was worried that the Lumix S1II would not have as much dynamic range as the Sony FX3, and thankfully the Lumix S1II actually excels at just standard dynamic range. Like, I don't even have to go into like dynamic range boost mode. I never have. I try to just keep it standard to maintain obviously good shutter, rolling shutter, and all of that nonsense. But overall, the Lumix S1II has been absolutely fantastic. And of course, in this situation, I'm able to control my dynamic range somewhat because the sun is behind me. It is hitting my White House, giving me a bit of like this key or fill, whatever you want to call it, so that I'm mostly getting an even image out of this particular shot. And yes, you can shoot with your red raw on your Nikon ZR. Now, the thing is, if you are willing to take on all that additional storage from using red raw, like whatever those bit rates are, and you want to shoot in red raw, more power to you. But like, don't go out of your way doing all that and then say you don't really need dynamic range, because the whole point of needing dynamic range is that you want this extra information, you want this extra bit depth, you want these extra colors, so you can push and pull and do what you please with your footage, understandably so. So yeah, dynamic range is important. And if the Nikon ZR dynamic range performs like some low-end trash, then we're gonna just have to keep in a buck and say that it's some trash dynamic range. It is what it is, and it makes sense, right? Because the Nikon ZR is using the same exact sensor as the Lumix S1II, if I'm not mistaken. However, the way each company decided to process the footage is different. Lumix decided to make the rolling shutter a little bit slower, right around 15 milliseconds, to maintain a decent rolling shutter performance, but with the extra processing power, it is able to process better dynamic range, at least in like its compressed codecs H.265, 422, 420. Nikon decided to emphasize rolling shutter performance around like 8 milliseconds or some bullshit like that. So of course it may not have the extra processing power to process dynamic range. To each his own. However, I think Lumix did a better job with its decision because 15 milliseconds looks completely fine to me. I would rather have more dynamic range than slightly better rolling shutter performance. Now, if it's rolling shutter like in like the 30 millisecond range, 26 millisecond, like A7 IV or you know, like Lumix S1II in full frame mode, like I'm not about that life. It needs to be within a certain threshold, and as long as it's 15 milliseconds and under, I'm generally good with it. No one is walking around doing all that nonsense all day. So there's that. To wrap this all up, like most of you dudes who already have way too many kids needs to start doing, either wrap things up or pull it out or do something like that. I get it. You know, the Nikon ZR is probably really good for content. It's really good for the YouTube algorithm. It's really good to get new followers because all of these poor, poverty-stricken filmmakers looking for cheap cameras, like the $2,000-ish Nikon ZR, is going to want to watch all this content on how to edit, how to color grade red raw, how to use the red raw workflow and all that. So I get it. Get your content. I'm not even hating on it. Get your subs, because honestly, keeping it a buck, I'm probably doing this video just because Nikon ZR is a good keyword for the tube doucher space right now. And I'm gonna get some clicks. I'm gonna get some views, clicks on my affiliate links below for things like this Hollyland Larkmax 2 32-bit float internal recording with hairy pubic hair wind muff right now because it is quite windy in this beautiful autumn day. So yeah, that is my opinion on how important dynamic range is, because at the end of the day, if you're going to be talking about properly lighting and being in the most ideal, you know, situation when it comes to contrast and exposure and color fidelity, really, you could probably just use an old A7 III with 8-bit. Don't even have to worry about shooting in log because you're lighting everything. You don't need to make any minor adjustments. Like, just use the camera as is, because if everything is lit well, then you're not going to have to worry about pushing and pulling the footage to get the look that you want. The whole point of having extra dynamic range, shooting in raw, open gate, you know, 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second, and all this nonsense specs on all these cameras, it's so that you have the option. Okay, do I need open gate? No, but it's nice to have. Do I need all of these Sony E-mount lenses? No, it's nice to have. Do I need to be able to shoot red raw? No, it's nice to have. Do I need extra dynamic range? Not all the time, but it's nice to have. Do I need to have 100,000 subscribers? No, I don't need 100,000 subscribers, but it's nice to have though. So please subscribe to the channel. Till next time, lighten up.
Hey, man, where you go?
Oh, I actually just got back from Sony Condo. Spoke to a bunch of creators. Had a great time.
Oh my God, Sony Condo? You're a rat? You say you switched to Lumix?
Come on, bro. You know I always keep it a buck. I brought my Lumix S1 Mark II with me.
No, man. If you want to be the best, if you want to be professional, if you want to be award-winning, when you sweat, you need to go deep inside.
I am not going deep inside any brand. Matter of fact, I won't grow if I don't try out different things.
It don't matter now. Lumix, Sony, they both trap now.
What are you talking about?
Let me show you. Nikon just announced the Nikon ZR. It has a big screen and it shoots red raw. Canon C50, it has Canon color shine. Plus it shoots open gate. Much better than FX3 and Lumix S1II Mark II.
Not gonna lie, they're nice cameras, and I'm not trying to slander camera brands or anything like that. First of all, the Lumix S1 Mark II can do 5.1K 60p full frame open gate. The Canon C50 could only do open gate up to 30p. And the file sizes are the size of my turd after eating Indian food for a week. And the Nikon ZR, it doesn't do open gate at all right now. Sure, it could shoot red raw or whatever, but the non-raw footage, kind of looking subpar in my opinion. Secondly, the Canon C50 looks like the FX3 has gone deep inside Canon for the past 5 years, and finally, Canon gave birth to the C50. And the Nikon ZR, it looks like the Sony FX3 and the ZVE1 and the Lumix S1 Mark II went deep inside Nikon. Not sure which one went deeper, and that's where the Nikon ZR came from. So what I'm saying is, if the FX3 didn't exist, you wouldn't even see the C50 or the Nikon ZR.
Sony Lumix Threat. That one Mark II is still overheat.
Yeah, the firmware update is coming, but like I always say, nothing is overheating more than your hot ass fish sauce breath.
Oh my God.